If it wears it, it's worth it. You have a miserable, rotten cold
Bullshit.
that's keeping you awake. Looks like
Bullshitting
another
about the
sleepless
past.
night.
Yeah.
But
If you're still having nightmares about your last haircut, next time, try Toppies. We'll give you the cut you like best with no surprises. How much? Just $6.
Good morning. Boy, was that Norman Fox lucky. If he hadn't had his faithful friend Trudy and run into this man here, Don Brown, an experienced examiner of question documents, he'd still be in the bucket after 8 years. Now, let me set up what happened in this particular case. Fox, as you know, got out last week and was seen exclusively on the Webster program. Here's what I asked Fox on the air. When did you feel that you had proven the case of your innocence or your non-guilt?
I thought it was proven at the trial.
After the trial?
After the trial, when Don Brown gave his handwriting analysis.
This is Don Brown, who's going to tell us a dramatic story behind that handwriting analysis of how in '79 it wasn't possible to compare his signature with the signature in the hotel register, of how later on the original documents were mislaid. But because Don had his experts' copies of the original documents, the Ministry of Justice accepted the fact that Fox was not the guy who signed the name H.A. Porter, and Fox was able to go free. That's point number one on the program this morning. Secondly, this morning we've got a charming and I hope garrulous Irishman from the United Nations, Erskine Childers, who is the director of the Information Division of the United Nations Development Program. And this is UN Week, and you've got to twinge your conscience and think about what you're going to do for United Nations or what United Nations can do for you. Now, for my next guest, before I introduce her, I want to give you a little analogy. Think of Canada as a bleeding big department store, and off in one corner is the complaints department, which is always understaffed. Well, we've got the complaints department for the government of Canada here this morning. And it is the intrepid Commissioner of Information by the name of Inger Hansen. And I want to know how she's getting on with her battle with Mulroney and whether or not they've kissed and made up yet. But first, for Don Brown and the drama of Norman Fox's good luck, not Norm Brown, Norm Fox, and the drama of his good luck in having the right handwriting expert late on in time, but nevertheless there to get him out of jail. And we'll tackle Brown after the break. Don Brown was 29 years with the RCMP, most of it spent in the crime detection laboratories in Ottawa, Regina, Edmonton, and Vancouver, finished up as a superintendent. And he became an examiner of question documents. Now, why didn't you get in on the act in 1979 when Norman Fox was first jailed, and he was jailed on the evidence of eyewitnesses without there being apparently a proper check of the signature H.A. Porter in the hotel in downtown Vancouver? Why weren't you in then and could have prevented him from going to jail at all?
Well, Jack, I was called in 1979 by a Providence newspaper reporter. I wasn't involved in the case whatsoever. I'd even heard of the case prior to that. And when Mr. Bird of the Providence newspaper called me in, he had a photostat copy of the question document, which is absolutely unreadable.
Which was an entry in a hotel register.
It was actually it was actually a registration form, not a book, a form.
Right, okay. So the guy gets convicted on eyewitness and other evidence, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
When did you come into the picture with the evidence that finally convinced the Minister of Justice to free him that that Fox had not signed that register under the name of H.A. Porter?
Approximately July of 1983, Jack, I got a call from Sasha Polyuk, who was a legal services lawyer. And she called me in because she knew I'd been involved prior to this with this newspaper reporter. And at that time, she had received handwritings from a chap from the estate of a chap who had committed suicide in Duncan. And she asked me if I could recall what was on the actual original photostat copy that I had of the questioned document. And looking at the handwriting of this chap that committed suicide, I was of the opinion that you look like you got the right person here. Now, if you can get me the original document out of the courts so I can give a proper examination, and this she did. She and I went down to the court registry office, and I think it was July of 1983, and through a chap named Trevor Lee, who was the custodian of the exhibits in the court registry, we did get the actual carbon copy of the original document from the Castle Hotel.
Was that good enough for your examinations?
For a microscopic examination, it was great. I had it in my possession for about 7 days. Microscopically, I could see that it was a genuine signature. It was fluently written. There was no indication whatsoever that somebody tried to disguise the writing in this particular document.
Let's look at the original signature. Now, this is from the registration, and that's it on the left, and you can see it. You can make out the name, H.A. Porter.
That's correct, Jack.
That's
yes.
the original signature.
That's the original
What's
signature.
What's that writing on the right-hand side?
On the right-hand side, Jack, that's handwriting I received from Mr. Fox. And just, you got to realize, Jack, that I had handwritings from Mr. Fox going back to 1976 to 1983. I had a great amount of handwritings from this person. And
let me say, the P in Porter is a very distinctive P. What's that word on the right-hand side of Fox's sample? P-A?
P-A-U.
Pow.
Yeah, I included some letter combinations of Mr. Fox's handwriting.
And can you tell from that the man who wrote Pow on the right-hand side could not have written them P. Orter on the left-hand side?
That's correct, Jack. No trouble at all.
Did you have any of the original writings of the man who committed suicide?
That's correct, Jack, yes. I got the 2 signatures of the chap that committed suicide, and I was able to positively identify him as being the person that signed
so you
that
were able to
particular
say,
registration.
one doesn't like to mention, but to make this clear, one's got to mention the name of that man, or the
That's
solution to the Fox case does not make sense if you don't make
correct.
this clear. Porter's signature in the register was the same as Porter's handwriting samples.
That's correct, Jack, right.
The handwriting of Fox, he could not have made that?
Not have done it, no way. Absolutely not.
Well, how could you? He might have forged it expertly and fooled you.
Nope. The question signature was written very fluently, speedily executed. There was no attempt to disguise or distort. There was no indication of a simulation. It was a genuine handwriting of a person who, in fact, identified as being Mr. Porter of the chap that committed suicide.
Did you, in fact, at any time have the chance to stand up in court on oath and testify that Fox did not sign Porter's name?
No, sir. I never had the opportunity to go into court with this particular case. I'd done my reports. I made up the charts, sent them all back, took them all back to Sasha Polyuk. She notified me that Dave Gibbons had taken over the case. In July of this year, July of 1984, I received a call from the court registry office saying that they couldn't find the exhibit that was involved. And then I got a call from Sasha Polyuk, because she got a call from the court registry office also. Now, I had gone down with Sasha, and we turned that exhibit directly over to Trevor Lee, the custodian of the court exhibits. Then I got a call from the RCM police, and shortly thereafter, they themselves had not got the exhibit. So I turned around and made up another report, completed report.
Just a minute. The exhibit which had been in the court registry had been mislaid.
Been mislaid, right.
And has not been found to this day.
Not to my knowledge.
So therefore, how did you manage to get this information so effectively into the hands, eventually, of the Minister of Justice?
I had made photographic copies of the exhibit when I had it in my possession, a number of copies. I had copies of Mr. Porter's handwriting, and I had copies of Mr. Fox's handwriting.
So you had your portfolio?
I had the whole portfolio. I turned it over to the serious crime section of the RCM police in July of 1984, and from there they went on to Ottawa with all the materials, and as a result, Mr. Fox.
So therefore, Fox is free because you had your own certified true copies of everything involved.
That's correct, Jack, yes.
Boy, was you lucky. Eh?
Well,
More with Don Brown after the break. I'm talking to Don Brown, examiner of questioned documents. In other words, he's an expert witness on handwriting. Is that right?
that's correct, Jack, yes.
How come? Do you happen to know if this man, Porter, if it was investigated as to whether or not he was a real person when his name was in the register?
Not to my knowledge, Jack, and I don't know why this was not done. You know, they could have put this to CPIC, the RCMP CPIC. I'd like to say, too, that the RCMP were not involved with this case. It was strictly a Vancouver City Police case. But that could have been referred to the RCM Police, or they could have gone ahead to the CPIC and obtained information. Perhaps, well, just
you and I know that the most reasonable and well-intentioned people in the world will tend to believe eyewitnesses. And there were the two women in North Vancouver who weren't believed, who saw Fox that night with his dog. But there was a hotel clerk who said that was the guy who signed the name.
And Jack, that's got to be the worst evidence in the world, is a physical mug book type of a thing. You know, identification of a person is terrible evidence. You've got to have something else in material particular to corroborate that kind of evidence, in my opinion.
How often does handwriting come up, though? I mean, it's not an everyday occurrence in court, is it?
Right now I get approximately 100 and maybe 120 cases a year. This particular month I've had 14 cases so far, which is a little bit too much for one document examiner to handle. But no, it's spread out, and I do cases for the Western provinces, so and Alaska and Washington State.
Most of your cases, of course, are actually on forgeries.
Yes,
where somebody else has signed somebody else's name for the purpose of getting hands on some money.
It could be property deeds, wills, things of that nature.
So therefore, this would be easier than a forgery case, because this was a case where the real man signed the register, and the wrong man had never been near the document.
That's correct. Yes.
Did that make it an easier case to handle?
Oh, absolutely.
Now, do you go by sheer instinct and visual perception, or what techniques do you use?
No, I use various photographic techniques. I have two very valuable microscopes, so I have a microscopic examination of the line quality of writing, the overall quality, proportions within the writing itself, initial strokes, the flying stars, the diminishing endings, the connecting strokes. A great number of things come into comparison here with reference to handwriting.
But you know, people's signatures change all the time, don't they?
We call that variations. Yes, your signature will change, Jack, on a daily basis, but they have variations in your handwriting. We expect to see those.
But if I'm in a good mood today, and if I'm confident and up and full of my normal nonsense, I write my name full of confidence. Right?
Right.
If the old ladies told me off before I left for the office in the morning, and I've got to deal with some of the people around here, like Wyatt or Schneider, my signature's all nervous.
Right. That's correct. And if you're writing a letter to a note to the milkman or the paper boy, it's going to be different to that if you're signing a name to a $100,000 mortgage. But for example, in the Fox case here, I got handwriting from 1976 to 1983, a great spectrum of his handwriting, and. Okay, if I'm doing an examination of your particular signature here, I want to ask for handwritings from you, covering a certain time frame. And from that, I'll say, yes, Jack, that is your signature, no doubt.
No doubt about it.
No doubt at all.
Or if I'm trying to forge somebody else's name, you can perhaps pick up my characteristics in
That's
that
right. Your natural characteristics, which you don't really know are there. You know, you're going to include them in the handwriting.
Is this the first time? Now, I want to make it quite clear. It was your examination of the handwriting documents, examined by the Ministry of Justice in Ottawa, with your long, distinguished background, which made the Justice Department, without a trial, give this guy a pardon.
That's correct, Jack, yes.
I love the way they said for being inadvertently convicted.
Yes.
Eh?
That's a nice word.
Now, no other questions in that case.
This is not the first case I've had of...
oh, that's what I was asking you. Not the first case where you've had a guy freed because of the wrong signature.
That's correct. I had a case here back in some years ago, and Arthur Maloney, he's now dead, the Ombudsman of Ontario. At that time, he was one of the top criminal lawyers in Ontario. He came into a bank robbery case after the fellow was convicted. A fellow had gone to a bank counter and wrote on the back of a bank form, "Give me all your money in small denominations and I have a gun." And 3 tellers identified that person by mug book. And after he got convicted, Arthur Maloney came in onto the case. He got the exhibit released from the courts, got the handwritings from this person that was committed, and he was quite sure that this man was not guilty. That's how he got in on the case. And no, that man didn't sign that particular handwriting, and is released on my evidence.
Just to finish up here, I want to show the most famous forgery in the last 40 years in British Columbia.
Yeah.
Now, that's okay. That name on the top is what?
That's W.A.C. Bennett, the top two signatures.
And the third signature is also W.A.C. Bennett.
And the third signature and the fourth and fifth signatures are all W.A.C. Bennett.
Now, a guy whom we know quite well went to jail for 6 months for forging Bennett's signature. Must be what, 20 years ago?
That would be, yes, be 19 years ago, Jack.
Right.
Yep.
Which is the forgery?
Well, the top two signatures are the W.A.C. Bennett signature that appears on government brochures. Not written by W.A.C. Bennett, but written by one of his, maybe a secretary. That's the signature used for his brochures.
That's a purported signature for public distribution.
That's correct.
What is the second one?
The center one with the Q in front of it, that's the W.A.C. Bennett signature that was simulated or forged by this particular person that we both know.
And so that guy actually attempted to copy the purported public signature.
Of W.A.C. Bennett, right.
Because the bottom signature is the real W.A.C.
They are the correct W.A.C.
signature.
Bennett signatures.
So if you're going to forge the name of a public figure, you must make sure that you're not forging a purported signature.
That's right. And that signature, of course, appeared on a letter to Mike Pearson's private secretary in Ottawa.
Called the Dear Hal letter.
That's right.
Involving an immigration case of one Harry Stonehill.
and Mr. Brooks.
And Mr. Brooks.
These were two chaps, these were ex-Marine people from the Philippines who had been deported, and they were trying to get them into Canada to build a glass factory here in the Lower Mainland. And the letter had been written to Mr. Pearson's private secretary asking him to ask Mr. Pearson to intercede on behalf of these two people. So he forged W.A.C. Bennett's signature to this particular letter.
Hal was a friend of mine. I won't use his second name.
Okay.
Dear Hal.
Yeah. That was something.
That was quite a case.
It was right, yeah.
Well, Fox and Trudy
yes.
deserve Trudy especially deserves a lot of credit.
Well, she must. I've never met her, Jack. I've spoken to her on the phone many times. Mr. Warwick has phoned me on the phone. Talked to me on the phone. But I like to meet Trudy. I think she must be quite a gal.
You haven't met this girl yet?
No, not
and Sasha Polyak, the legal services lawyer, was very good.
Oh, yes. Sasha Polyak. Right.
As well as the other members of the committee.
Fantastic.
Well, Don, if I'm ever accused of forgery...
Come and see me.
And I'm not guilty, I'll come and see you. If I'm guilty, I'll stay away from you.
Okay, Jack.
My thanks to Don Brown. Next, Erskine Childers, Director of the Division of Information. Sounds like a stuffy kind of guy, of the United Nations Development Program. The life ambition of broadcasters and journalists, you know, after they've made their mark in life, is to get a job in the United Nations, to have tax-free money, first-class travel, and a ball under the name of doing good for the United Nations. Now, how does that start you off, Erskine?
It starts me off, first of all, that it's not doing good for the United Nations, it's doing good for the planet. That's number one. Number two, we are not tax-free. This is one of the biggest nonsenses that's pervade among Western media. I don't see about 1/3 of my gross income. I never see it. It's gone back to my own country, Ireland, as tax. Same for every UN civil servant.
But what about the first-class travel on the private limousines?
I flew here in the back of 2 planes from New York in coach.
Yeah. But you don't mind me pulling your leg.
And by the way,
that.
that's the law. It's not my choice. I have to fly coach.
Yeah, so in other words, it's a fairly lean organization as far as the... Because you're a fairly senior official, Director of the Division of Information of the UN Development Program.
That's right.
What the hell's the UN Development Program?
The UN Development Program
See,
is...
I always like to relate my programs on the air to what the guy's going to talk about in the pub or at home with the old lady. And he's not likely to say, well, to his wife, let's sit down and talk seriously about the United Nations Development Program.
Well, God love us, I wish they would. Now, the problem about it is
well, you convinced me.
People don't know about it because it's the good news side of the organization. It's the side of the organization that is helping the people of the developing countries to find their natural resources and use them, to build their own skills in management and in technology, to become partners in trade with, among other countries, Canada. How do you think all that happened?
I don't know.
Well, look, if Canadian exports can get into almost any port in the third world, it's because behind it was a job of surveying that port, building it up, training the people to run the port. That's the work of the UN Development Program.
Now, this is, of course, with third world countries.
Yes.
Africa mainly.
Africa now heavily, yes, obviously, but also the Caribbean, Latin America still, and Asia, the Pacific, the Arab
You're telling
world.
me there's a side to this coin whereby businessmen could use the UN Development Program to create jobs in this country?
Oh, sure. My goodness, yes.
For instance?
Well, last year, let me see, last year Canada supplied nearly $4 million worth of equipment to my organization, the UN Development Program. There were some $3.3 million worth of subcontracts to Canadian firms to go out and do the surveying, the planning, the training. We hired 250 Canadian experts in every field you could imagine. That's nearly 1 in every 50,000 adults in Canada, by the way.
Fair enough.
That's
fair enough.
worth, again...
Where do you get your money, though?
We get our money from all over the world, poor countries, small countries. Canada very handsomely, and I'm here to say it, Canada is currently number 3 in the governments in the world contributing to the United Nations Development Program, after the United States and Japan. And I don't mind having an opportunity to say thank you.
These are all kind of people programs, then?
Yeah.
Programs for people?
Programs for people. We don't write cash to any government. We hire the Canadian specialist and pay the Canadian specialist. We buy the Canadian equipment and bring it in. By the way, we also send...
That means you're not, for instance, supplying gold bedsteads as in the old scandalous days in Ghana,
no,
I think it was at that time.
No.
So therefore, you're an organization that surveys the countries and then goes to the developed nations and say, okay, let's have these men, these people, these resources,
That's
and go
the
and put the
idea.
job. Have you got a jewel in your crown that you would point at as the best development of the United Nations Development Program?
Well, it's hard to pick. There are 4,500 projects running today under UNDP, but for example, we've managed to increase the production of rice in Burma 3.5 times more than the population increase, just to give you one quick example. We're working to push back the desert in the sub-Sahara Africa. Many of these cases, by the way, where we go in and we design the project, and then Canada will come in and put some extra money with us.
Yeah.
For example, the Senegal River Basin Scheme in Africa, where we did the planning for it, and Canada, among other governments, came in with larger scale capital to put the thing together.
What's this about pushing back the desert and the Sahara?
The desert is creeping south every single year relentlessly, and the job of trying to stop that, trying to build sand dune fixation schemes, planting trees that will stand up to the wind blowing the sand, trying to fix the sand dunes. They roll in sandstorms relentlessly over arable land.
I've probably got the wrong agency, but maybe it was UNESCO that was the states were threatening to pull out of because it was badly administered at one time.
That's
UNESCO.
right. That's a current issue.
The Americans have something in their craw about UNESCO.
Well,
what
that's a
about
current
UNDP? How is your international image?
I think our international image is pretty good, where again I may say where we're known of because we're good news, so we're not known very well. But you name me another large-scale bureaucracy that twice since 1976 cut its staff. 1976 we cut our staff 13%, 1982 we cut our staff 8%.
Is this sheer efficiency factors you're going for?
It's going for efficiency, and we did it voluntarily.
What
by the
about
way.
businessmen in Canada? Is there a market for businessmen in Canada to contact you to see if their services are needed?
That's right. That's
Is
right.
there?
We have registers for consultants. We have standard procedures whereby Canadian firms can register to bid. By the way, all our procurement, you know, the equipment, the subcontracts, is by international bidding. So there's no kind of, arrangement whereby Canada's going to get a percentage every year. You've got to bid for it, and the best and the lowest bid gets it.
All right, if I'm a school teacher or a broadcaster or an engineer, can I register with you in these times of reasonably bad recession in this country for a job?
Yes, of course, we've been hit by the recession too, Funds are down. So we're not programming at the same level that we were a few years ago, but we're still working.
I was hoping they could get a job to set up a broadcasting division in some Central African Republic and become dictator.
Well, no, I don't know about that.
Have you any questions for Erskine Childers? You went to Trinity College, Dublin.
I did.
Well educated, on the face of it, aren't you? Questions for Erskine Childers. Let's try some calls about the United Nations. Any aspect except international relations. The development program. After the break. You're speaking to somebody here this week, are you?
Who, me? Yes,
Yeah.
I'm speaking today. There's a conference on in Vancouver.
In Vancouver.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if we're going to get much in the way of action on phone calls with the United Nations. Now, if we were to ask people what they thought of Reagan's speech last night, it'd be different, but we won't do that
Thank
in
you.
deference to your august presence
you.
here this morning. Good morning. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
You asked, at the start of your show, asked what the United Nations could do for us or what we could do for the United Nations. Now, the United Nations, to me, has gone way over its head. I thought it was a body that was organized to stop wars. Now, there's been plenty of wars that they haven't stopped since they were organized. And when Russia and when the United States can just put a veto in on anything, it's not a democratic organization.
Now, I just said to you anything but international relations, wars, but Erskine will answer the question of what good the United Nations is apart from international relations.
Oh, well, I'll try and answer that too. There are many wars that didn't happen because of the United Nations. There are many wars that would still be continuing if the UN hadn't put in peacekeeping forces. The problem, I mean, you said it yourself, friend caller. Look, the United Nations was set up with a built-in veto. Now, we who work in the United Nations, we can't stop that veto. If there's going to be a change in that, it's going to be by the people who start the very first words of the Charter of the United Nations. We, the peoples of the United Nations.
Fair enough.
Right up.
Okay, bye. Go ahead, please.
Hello, yeah. Would you be interested in an idea for flood control and soil reclamation?
We would indeed. We are looking all the time. We're searching the world for fresh, innovative, sound, and low-cost ideas. Ideas that a community, a poor community, can sustain themselves. You see, there's no use putting in an expensive flood control or water supply system, which runs beautifully, while the outside money's there. The outside money then has to move somewhere else, and the villagers can't sustain it. But yes, we're interested in ideas. We
My
sure are.
best, this is going back in my memory, and it's probably unfair to raise it. My best one, I think, is a Canadian company that set up an automated plant in Cairo to make plastic sandals. And they were a great success. It turned out millions of plastic sandals. The trouble was that they ruined the local culture, which used hides for sandals, employed people hand-stitching sandals, kept the whole industry going, whereas two men and a boy could press a button and produce plastic sandals, which had to be imported at great cost. Has that kind of stupid development been stopped?
It's slowing down. Let's put it this way. More and more people, I think, are learning the lessons of those earlier years. I really think that is true, yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes.
My question to Mr. Childers doesn't concern the United Nations, but I was wondering, he has a very famous name, and I wonder if he's any relation to the Childers who wrote a book called The Riddle of the Sands.
Oh, just a minute. The Riddle of the Sands was about 1911, wasn't it?
Right?
And
That's
it
right, before the
predicted-
First Great War.
And it predicted the First Great War. What was that Childers' first name?
Erskine.
Yes,
Are you related to Erskine Childers of The Riddle of the Sands?
yes, that was my grandfather.
That was your
Yes.
grandfather.
That's
I
right.
thought it was your grandfather.
Eh?
This wanted to know for sure.
That's correct.
That's
yes.
fascinating, because that's a book that's talked about to this day with considerable awe. Do you remember the old Josser?
No, he was executed 7 years before I was born.
He was, as a traitor.
He
British.
was in the Irish freedom struggle.
That's it. He was shot by the Brits at Mountjoy in London.
Yes,
in Dublin.
he was shot by an Irish firing squad, but Mr. Churchill was not happy with him.
You got it, tell you. I mean, how often do we meet Erskine Childers' grandson? Your father was shot by an Irish firing squad.
Yes, my grandfather.
Grandfather.
My father took over, my grandfather the night before asked him to shake the hand of anyone who had ever been involved in his death. And my father, a very young boy, 17 years old, then went into politics, and he died as President of Ireland some years back.
Why didn't you tell me this before we came on? Your
Because-
modesty doesn't become you. He was the Childers who was President of Ireland.
Yes, that's right, yes.
What was your grandfather's... Well, you can't say. Why was he executed?
He was executed because he, along with Mr. De Valera, believed in an Ireland that would be totally free, believed in an Ireland that must have a chance for unification. And he was probably executed also because he was an authority on British Constitution, on the Empire. He knew a great deal, put it that way.
Yeah, I'm just trying to relate him to De Valera. Was he with De Valera?
Yes, he was
with De Valera.
he was Dev's
Oh, that was when
right-hand man.
Ireland was riven in two.
That's right.
At the time of the guerrilla battalions.
Over the treaty. you see?
And the guy.
Over the
What was
treaty.
the name of the guy who was shot in Cork? Collins?
General Collins, yes.
General
Yeah.
Collins,
Yeah,
that's right.
that's right.
Oh, you have a distinguished and family background. do you
Well,
not?
it's a hard business to live up to those standards, but
Yeah.
one tries anyway.
Did I ask you your personal opinion if there's any prospect of a rational, sane peace in Ireland as a united Ireland, which it must be one day?
Yes, there will be one day. I have to apply, I'm sorry to be stuffy, but as a UN civil
Yeah.
servant, I have to apply that rule even to my own country. We don't talk about any one country.
Back to the United Nations. Go ahead, please, from Prince George.
Yes, this is Neil Dunsmore here.
Yes, Neil.
What I had to say, Jack, was I would like to know more what the UN's involvement is with. I've heard lots of good things about third world countries, etc., and their development over there and their participation in projects. What do they do more for, like, larger countries like Canada, etc.? Like, what is their involvement in helping us?
Well, our involvement in helping Canada, of course, is the business of trying to invigorate a genuine world economy. We're not providing technical assistance to Canada. Canada doesn't need it. We draw Canadian specialization into the work we're doing with the developing countries. But look, let me just put it to you this way. By the late 1970s, because of the work of the developing countries, with the assistance of the UN and all forms of aid, the Third World had become a major partner in trade with the industrialized countries. We're locked together now. We can't do without each other. And that partnership, the ability of developing countries to buy from Canada, can be traced again and again to the work of UNDP. So it's a very mutual thing. It's both cooperation for the sake of the whole planet, and it's cooperation in everyone's interest, including Canada.
And who am I to spoil the note? I'm delighted to have met you, Erskine Childers. And maybe one day we might meet in a pub in Dublin and have a pint of Guinness.
We'd have a lovely time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
indeed.
very much.
Inger Hansen, Information Commissioner for the Department Store of Canada, after the break. Inger Hansen is based in Ottawa. Inger Hansen is not the Privacy Commissioner.
Thank you.
Inger Hansen is the Information Commissioner.
Right.
Inger Hansen has been having problems with the Mulroney government. Are you free to speak about your problems with governments?
Well, you ask the questions, and I'll try to wriggle out of it.
I want to get hold of a cabinet document, and because I want to see the details of the decision made in, some international complication. Can I come to you and get the information?
No, as you mentioned before, it's like a department store. You've got to shop before you complain. If you ask for it, you might get it, or you might get some of it. The Act says that it does not apply to confidences of the Queen's Privy Council, so that's an out. The integrity of the decision-making process in Cabinet is protected by law from disclosure. But it also says that Cabinet memoranda and discussion paper may be released after a decision has been made public, or if a decision has not been made public 4 years later. Nevertheless, I've tried to say to people, if you ask for something along those lines, the government in the first instance might cast the net too wide, and you may wish to complain to me and say, all of what I've asked for cannot be a cabinet secret. Then you complain to us, and we will go and ask questions through the investigators, and if there's some doubt in our mind as to the vastness of the material that has been withheld from you, we have authority under the Evidence Act to ask for a certificate from the minister. This was an arrangement that was arrived at through negotiations with Privy Council Office. Mr. Oswald Destin and I sat down and talked about it, and he agrees with my contention that where you're saying something is a cabinet secret, it's a minister who must sign for it.
When you're telling me that, that's a big step forward. When did this take place?
It was put into directives to staff this summer after we negotiated it.
Up until then, would it be the case that I could have been foiled by a bureaucratic decision without the minister's kind of cognizance?
I wouldn't like to use the word foiled, but you know, a public servant who says, no, you can't have it, is likely to err on caution. Whereas if you come to us and complain, we will take a look at that and see, have they cast the net too wide? But if people don't complain to me, I won't know about it.
Yeah, but in the meantime, you can then decide that perhaps the net has been cast too wide, ask for the information again, and you can only be refused if the minister takes the time and the trouble to investigate it and sign a certificate.
When it concerns cabinet secrets, yes.
Yeah, when it concerns the cabinet secrets.
Mm-hmm.
Cabinet, you can never get what one cabinet minister said to her about another. That's confidentiality and discussion, isn't it?
Yes.
That's a different thing.
Inside the cabinet chamber, of
Well,
course.
that's very good indeed.
I'm very pleased with that.
Now,
yes.
you are taking action at the moment, I believe, you can fill me in on it, so that you can find out, for somebody else I presume, what the salary levels are in top Crown Corporation jobs.
Yes, it's a long story.
I put that
and
very
put it
clumsily,
carefully.
but please explain it to me, because that's one of the pieces of information which is so infuriating. You can't, somebody gets appointed or gets a 2-year sabbatical in Paris with his dog or whatever, and we can never get the details of the amount of money's involved.
It's a long story, but
Tell me.
I would like
I'd
to
like to hear
develop
that.
it for it. A journalist from Southern News asked for the emoluments of certain Crown Corporation heads. They are order-in-council appointees, meaning they are appointed by cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
He was refused access on the grounds that this was personal information. Now, the Access Act, which is the Freedom of Information Act, prohibits disclosure of personal information as defined in the Privacy Act. The Privacy Act is the one that deals with personal information. Now then we went to the definition of personal information in the Privacy Act, and there we found that it said that in respect of officers and employees of government institutions, the salary range could be disclosed or was disclosable. Now, two questions arise from that. One is, what is a government institution for the purposes of the Act? And the other one, does range include a fixed salary? I'll deal with first one, or the last one first. In logic, in arguing with a mathematician, you would say a fixed point between two extremes is included in the range. But when it comes to arguments between lawyers, that is by no means certain. And that is one of the issues before the court. The other one is government institutions. For purposes of the Act, government institution is defined as any of the institutions listed in the Act. Now, only 2 of the government institutions with which this applicant is concerned are listed in the Act. But there is room for argument for saying that the wording government institution in that section should be the ordinary meaning of the words.
Which are the 2 government institutions named in the Act?
Canada Post, and I am sorry, it slipped my mind what the other one is.
Canada Post is one of them.
Yes.
But I would have thought that government institutions meant everything and anything set up by the government.
No, it doesn't, because for purposes of gaining access to records in government institutions, Crown corporations competing with the private sector are not, generally speaking, included. So that there's a legal hurdle to overcome in this. But I have one more point.
Go on.
It also says in the Privacy Act that personal information may be released where the public interest in disclosure, and I'm quoting from the Act, clearly outweighs the right to informational privacy of the individual. And that is the final argument I made, was that in these circumstances, the public interest should outweigh that of the person to financial privacy. Now, I should say that, first of all, I was criticized for bringing this up during an election. I did not. The thing took its course. It has been before 3 prime ministers in this short time. It was before Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Turner, and it is now before Mr. Mulroney. It is still carried on in the courts. There will be a motion for direction as to when it might be heard next, or the 31st of October.
So in other words, it's not a question of you battling with Mulroney or anybody else. It's
not
merely
at
a
all.
question of you attempting to have the interpretation of your duties and the availability of information made clear to the public.
Yes, and the meaning of the Act. And you see, there's going to be a review of the Act 3 years from 1st July 1983 by Parliament. And no matter what the outcome is of this application to the court, we will get a clearer definition of what Parliament meant.
Well, I've got a very simple definition to put to you. See if I can get it clearly so that lawyers wouldn't argue. Question.
Impossible.
Is it not the total right of the public, with no other considerations involved, total right of the public who pay the taxes to know to the last cent what money is paid to anybody out of our tax funds or our government operations? Is it not our basic right to know to the last cent how our money is spent?
That is one question I cannot answer for fear of being in contempt of court.
Prejudging the case.
I don't want to do that.
No,
I'm taking it to see what the Act means. And you see, when I do my work, it doesn't matter what I think is right. I'm like a law enforcement body.
You follow the Act.
Yes.
But the personal information at the moment can be released where it outweighs the public interest factor.
Yeah, where the public interest clearly outweighs the right to privacy. Now, that is also in there. For instance, let us say someone were killed in an airplane accident and you want to inform the next of kin very quickly. But what you have to do, and this is another intricacy in this lawsuit, before the government releases it, they have to go to the Privacy Commissioner and say, what do you think about this? So we're applying to have the Privacy Commissioner, John Grace, made a party to the action too. You know, lawyers can argue for a long time.
A long, hard battle Inger Hansen or anybody else will have to get information freedom defined as freedom of information. After the break. Inger Hansen is the Information Commissioner, and she must follow the letter of the interpretation of the law. Now let's get back to this guy, John Ferguson of Southam's. What was it he sought, first of all, that he was refused?
He asked for the emoluments, and that by that was meant the fringe benefits and salaries. He got the fringe benefits, and I should add that there's some inconsistency in what you release and what you don't release, because for some Ordinance Council appointees, the salary is known, say the Commissioner of Official Languages, the Chief Electoral Officer.
Your salary?
My salary is known.
What is it?
$90,000 a year.
But it's known, it's public.
I try to earn
straight
it.
up. Yeah.
But
for others, it is not known.
No.
Joel Bell is a name that comes to mind. I can't even think what job he has now, but he was a big shot somewhere. Do you know what he does now?
he is one of the parties in law.
He's one of the...
Yes.
Now, they're prepared to tell Ferguson the emoluments, but not the specific salary.
Because of the legal arguments I just put before.
Range.
Range, public institution, and public interest.
Well, with deference and respect to the case before the courts, I think that's nonsense, but we'll leave that to the courts. Now, is there any way that you can drop your cases in court?
Well, as you know, Mr. Maroney has spoken publicly and made statements, as reported in the newspapers, that he would release it. But in a lawsuit, you carry on until you hear from the other party to that effect.
In other words, if there were a cabinet decision to release information,
The lawsuit is
would
finished.
that? Does the cabinet have the authority to release any information it wants at any time?
Almost, I would say. A minister has almost authority. The Act distinguishes between discretionary and mandatory exemptions. And the one we are dealing with is one that is discretionary, that is, a minister may at all times release it.
Now, just to get it, we're going to take phone calls very shortly, but just to get this quite clear, the Privacy Commissioner and the Information Commissioner.
Two different people, two different acts.
Spell
two
out
different
privacy
subjects.
again, simply, for even I forget little bits of privacy.
Privacy is informational rights in respect of your own records. The right to know what's there, the right to seek corrections, the right to make sure that it is used in an appropriate and lawful fashion.
Me and me alone.
You and your government.
In other words, it might be a psychiatric examination filed on me when I was in an institution.
If it were a federally controlled institution, yes.
I'm trying to
You're
think
likely to get it, too.
Yeah, no.
I mean,
Not
the report.
You mean the report, not the
Yes.
psychiatric examination.
Yes.
And then the
I'm
information.
glad you said that.
And the information is information relating to government activities.
Freedom of information, as it's called in the United States, that is any record, no, regardless of form, whether it's computerized, it's a map, it's a photograph, it's a draft,
But
whatever.
mind you, this must be a pain in the you-know-what to
It is.
civil servants.
It is, because it takes them away from doing the job they're supposed to do. But as you know, and now I'll confuse it even more, I was the Privacy Commissioner for over 5 years. And during that term, public servants came to realize that they too are members of society and it benefits them too.
Good. Now, Western complaint. We don't get to the office till 9 o'clock in the morning, by which it is noon in Ottawa, and no time flat, the offices are closed at 4 o'clock, or 5 to 4, or 7 minutes to 4, or 3:30 on occasions we have found. Is this not a bar to information across this country, and what do you plan to do about it?
You know, my heart is still in BC, and I lived here for 17 years, and I know about this. Then you try to phone Ottawa, they are at lunch, and when you're at lunch, they're finished and they've gone home. So we did two things. In line with the government program to provide employment for handicapped people, we have two people sharing a job because they cannot work full-time. They are on the switchboard from 7 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night. And there is an investigator on duty all the time. I usually stay till 6 too. Now, I had a little battle with our own bureaucracy over that, and so they gave me a Christmas present I'd love to show you.
Yes, please.
That's what I got.
Easily accessible. Inger Hansen, easily accessible. And on the other side, 995-2410, collect.
Collect, that's right.
Open until 6 o'clock, 6:30 in Newfoundland. Oh, that's great. That's great, Inger. That's terrific. Any chance of getting the government to change some of its hours for the sake of the West?
Well, it's a start. Let's see what happens.
Okay, what information do you want from Inger Hansen? Inger Hansen. Before you were privacy commissioner, you were ombudsman for the prisons.
That's right.
That's right. Ombudsperson, please forgive me.
I like that.
Questions to Inger Hansen, and we're going to talk about how much it costs you to get this information to after the break. Inger Hansen is the Information Commissioner. And here's a question from Victoria. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mrs. Hansen, I wonder if you would comment on the fact that the right to withhold information and the discretion to withhold information in the first instance rests with the head of a government institution or department. And where, in the case of some information which might be embarrassing to that department or organization, they have the right to withhold it in the first instance, and then we have to go to your office in order to get it released. Would you comment on that discretion, please? I'll hang up and hear your answer.
All right. I would like to state that the government cannot withhold information on the grounds that it's embarrassing. The Canadian Act spells out the various kinds of reasons for withholding information. I will give you an example of something that is mandatory. Information received in confidence from a province cannot be released at the will of the head of the government institution at the federal level. A discretionary exemption would be, for instance, something that would be injurious or could reasonably be expected to be injurious to federal-provincial relations or could endanger the safety of another individual. Now there is room for argument, and what happens is that the government department may have withheld it. Then if you come to us, we will examine and inquire into could the injury expected reasonably occur, and we will ask for evidence to that effect. And of course, as you may know, our office is independent of the government. We do not take directions from public servants or from ministers, and we report directly to Parliament.
Go ahead, please, from Nanaimo.
Yes, Jack, I'd like to talk to your guest for a moment. I have a good question.
Yep.
When we gave birth to, or soon after we gave birth to our second child, we tried to name them in line with my name. My name is James Edward II. My father's name is James Edward I. Now, we tried to name our boy James Edward III. It took us 5 months, and the government finally would only accept the third written out in 2 words. Now he has 4 names. Now, I have English heritage, and it should be James Edward III with a number 3 at the end of it, or numeral 3, I should say.
Roman numerals.
That's correct. Now, why would the government do something as...
Just a minute. Has he got the right government?
You have the wrong government. If you do not succeed with your government, you might try a lawyer or the provincial ombudsman. I'm sorry, it is not within my mandate.
Wait just 1 second, I'm fascinating. They won't let you call him James Edward III with 3 Roman numerals for 3.
Absolutely correct.
Who are these bureaucratic nitwits who take such a position?
This is Ottawa.
It's
No, it's
Ottawa?
not Ottawa.
Oh, this is
What do
Ottawa.
you mean?
Oh, maybe because it's a crown.
Come on. Tell us
My
all about it.
heritage is English.
But
I live in Canada.
all right, who turned you down?
The people from the registration of birth
birth,
for birth certificates in Canada.
But that is provincial, sir, and I would go to a lawyer or, as I say, to the provincial ombudsman.
Don't go away. Where are you? We lost them.
Across the country, the federal.
No. It's not federal. It's the Department of Vital Statistics in BC, is it not?
No, it's BC also, yes. Federal also.
Is the federal government objecting because it sounds like the name of a king?
Must be. Well, I tell you what, you're on a bad connection here, and I'm afraid I'm going to lose you.
Well, they gave no specific reason. Now, I remember back in the 60s when all the hippies was calling their kids Moonchild and Moonbeam and whatnot. That was accepted. carry on my name line through my family.
What's your phone number?
Phone number is 753
Uh-huh.
7904.
All right, that's a fair question, and we'll get you an answer. And somebody has ruled that call him James Edward the Third, written out. And if you'd put a hyphen in there too, if you'd called him James Johnson Edward with a hyphen, they would have ruled that out too.
Isn't that silly?
Well, but I want to get in touch with you at your number, which you have given me, and we'll answer that as a fair question. Just check the number with the Ginty, will you please?
Yes, sir.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Get some great stuff on odd phone calls. Go ahead, please.
Good morning to both of you. Now, I would like to ask your charming guest, does she hold a degree in law, which I presume she does?
Your presumption is absolutely correct, and I hold a degree in law from this province, and I practice law in this province.
Wonderful. Second answer, you already answered to Jack about your salary. I think you are worth double that salary. And my third answer is, how many employees are in your department and what are their salaries? Because the general public doesn't know much about your department. Oh, sorry. That is also a fair question. I will try to answer it. John Grace and I share offices, John Grace being the Privacy Commissioner. There is a corporate managed team which was established before we took offices. They run the business and provide us with supplies and provide our budget preparations and so on. Then we have investigator components, and I have 6 investigators and a director. I have a secretary and an assistant, and there are there's a lawyer for John Grace and a lawyer for me, because John Grace and I may be we may be in conflict legally. John Grace has 2 components. One is to deal with complaints and one to deal with audit.
Enough. Now,
salaries?
I wish you will be our next Prime Minister.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Who knows, there might be vacancies in any parties at any moment. Go ahead, please.
It's like a Chinese curse.
Hello.
Ms. Hansen.
Yes.
Ms. Hansen, do you happen to know where does Prime Minister Mulroney's version of a Freedom of Information Act leave Auditor General Kenneth Dye with respect to the books of our Crown corporations? Is Mr. Dye right back to square one where he started from and left off with Pierre Elliott Trudeau?
Of course, I cannot speak for Mr. Dye, but the best of my knowledge is that the action is at about the same stage as ours.
He, of course,
in the federal court.
He is suing for full access to the books of Crown
corporations. That is correct.
But he's in front of the courts too.
Yes.
And again, caller, as you well know, if Mulroney sees the light and releases the books as he said he would during the campaign, Dye can be able to drop his charges. But it's lucky we've got Dye and Hansen and company around. One of your big victories, or big decisions, I saw a piece in Maclean's magazine, it was in releasing a report which had been refused on, what do you call that stuff? Formaldehyde? Urea formaldehyde foam insulation.
Yes. That came as a bit of surprise to me too, including the article. And I would like an opportunity to correct it. I cannot order anybody to do anything.
Well, let me give the background first of all.
Yes.
The Toronto Star used the Access to Information Act to obtain a copy of a commission study which indicated that the Liberals knew that urea formaldehyde was suspected of causing cancer when they approved its use. Now, and it says in here, the newspaper appealed to Information Commissioner Inger Hansen, who ordered the documents released.
Yes. We had a meeting with the chairman of the Law Reform Commission. We debated the wording of the act. It had been withheld on the ground that it was advice to a government institution. But there's an exception in that act, and this is all terribly technical, but that exception said that where an outside consultant has written a report, it is releasable. And that exception did not work in this particular case. Now, we were debating, was this a person, an outside consultant, or an employee? And during the course of that debate, Mr. Justice Linden gave in and released the report.
In other words, Maclean's is semantically wrong when it said that you ordered the documents released. But your intervention had a lot to do with the release of the documents.
True.
I put it to you.
That is true.
You're being overly modest. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes.
I was wondering with these information banks, I've been trying for many number of years to obtain information about my own mother. I was adopted out when I was very young, and I was wondering, would this open it up, this information bank?
Your adoption papers as such and the work done for purposes of the adoption is within provincial jurisdiction, and you would have to use other sources. Now, there is an interesting aspect to the Access to Information Act that where a person has been dead for 20 years in Canada now, any federal record is releasable unless for other reasons it cannot be released.
What federal record could there be? If they died in a jail?
Yes, or if they received a federal grant, if the parent was a soldier in the war, or even
Or if
without
they
the
received
war.
an old age pension?
Yes, exactly. So that for anyone who's interested in researching their family tree, the Access to Information Act is a new source, and there'll be something about that in our annual report.
In other words, if I wanted to look at, I have a kind of great step-uncle here somewhere, my grandfather's brother,
Yes.
dead many years,
Yes.
who drew the Canadian old age pension. Could I look at his application form for an old age pension?
Provided you can show he's been dead for 20 years, yes. And this is an aspect of the law that has not yet come to public knowledge. But there's
That
a
might
wealth
help
of research material.
Yeah, how much does it cost?
It would cost you $5 for the application, and I would suggest you narrow your request to a specific document first, or find out how they organize their files so that you don't ask for too much or get duplicates
But
because
if I
you
just
pay
give
for
them
it.
his name and say he's got to be dead because he was 85 the last time I saw him, that wouldn't be good enough, would it?
No, I would start out by talking to the person in the department, and this may be archives, and say, how much am I likely to find? What kind of records do they have? Can I see them instead of getting photocopies? And cut down on the cost, because what happened in the beginning was that people would ask, the way you ask a question in the House of Commons, I want to know everything about urea formaldehyde. Well, you'd get maybe 500 meters worth of files, and that costs a lot of money to find and to copy, and you can debate whether the taxpayers should pay for it or whether the applicants should. But if you can narrow your request, you can cut the cost.
Well, Inger Hansen, thank you very much for being here this morning. Fascinating information. Give me that. Show me your shirt again. Well, if she's easily accessible,
Looks good on you.
so am I easily accessible. All I've got to do is call me. And on the other side, that's a number.
That is
Call
right.
collect. Call collect and ask for Inga. Easily accessible. Will you forgive
You
me?
would, of course.
That's a little bit sexist and chauvinistic. But
Well, I'll turn the tables on you one day.
Good. My thanks to Inger Hansen. Webster, I've got a couple of TAFQs to do, and I want to take some free-for-all phone calls after the break. I don't know. Oh, first of all, is it correct that if I want to name my child James Edward III, Roman numerals and 3, that I shall be refused permission? On the telephone, to show you the incredible fast response from both the government and from Webster, I have John Harvey. Are you there, John?
Yes, I am.
John Harvey, Regional Manager for Vital Stats. Can you give me an answer to the question posed to me by a chap, I think from Nanaimo, about being refused permission to name his child James Edward III?
We don't accept the numbers or numerals, Jack, on a registration. It's confusing to the name. We would accept the third or the second if it was written in full.
James Edward II, or in this case, James Edward the Third.
Yes.
In other words, you bend the rules to give him a forename instead of two names in the Roman numerals.
Yes, that is correct.
Supposing I want to call him, call somebody John Edgar-Webster II. You wouldn't allow the second unless it was written out. What about the hyphen?
The hyphen, we won't take the hyphen either at the present time.
Why is that, John?
There's no provision made in the Vital Statistics Act at the moment to include
the numbers or numerals or hyphens.
Mind you, supposing I want to call my child a silly name, like Moonbeam or Love Child or Stinker. You don't object to what the name is, do you?
No, we don't object to the names.
We can use any name we want. You could call them by any ridiculous names you like, but no hyphens and no...
Ridiculous names, the decision when we do become, in certain circumstances, where the registrar in question has some reservation about the names that are concerned, then it's up to the decision to be made by the Director of Vital Statistics to accept the names.
In other words, the Director of Vital Stats has the authority in extreme cases to say, I'm not going to let you call your child Marblehead.
Yes, very true. That's correct.
And if this guy in Nanaimo is going to get the Roman numerals, he's got to get a friendly MLA to get an amendment passed to the Act, or is it the regulations?
To the Act and also to the regulations. To both, Jack.
John, I can't blame you for policy, but I don't see why it should be. But I'm very grateful for your explanation and your instant cooperation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John.
Bye-bye.
John Harvey, Regional Manager for Vital Stats. Well, have we had a flood of phone calls for a TAFQ about Trudeau? Here is the question. How come Trudeau gets 123 here. 125, it's 123 family allowance for his kids. I have 3 kids and only get $90. Why the $35 difference for him? I hate to tell you the number of questions we've had on it. Sorry about that misprint on the question. Let me give you the explanation. And there's no need to start a separate republic because of this particular answer. Pierre Trudeau lives in Quebec. In Quebec, they get the same amount of money per child from the national taxation, which is $29.95 per child average. But Quebec allocates the fund differently. It depends on the age of the children in the family and the number. In Quebec, the first child over 12 gets $25.11. The second child gets $28.55. The third and all subsequent children get $69.49. So that's $123.15 is the proper allowance for 3 children of that age in the province of Quebec. There is a separate provincial grant for children. Isn't that right, Annie? Which comes out of Quebec taxes. For instance, in Quebec, the first child under 11 only gets $17.98. So believe you me, Trudeau doesn't get any extra lolly from the federal government. But Quebec is always very big on encouraging larger families. And with the provincial tax, they have an incentive to have lots of little kiddie poos. The only trouble is the incentive ain't working, and their birth rate ain't no better than our birth rate, and they have much colder winters than we have. So don't get mad at Pierre. He's only collecting, as every multimillionaire should, who has children at his advanced age, young children. Jesus, I look awful this morning. I don't like some of these camera shots on me. Make me look fat, and I'm not fat. I haven't unannounced since I lost all that weight. That's better, thank you. And we're doing a free-for-all, but there are no phones. I only want the question which is listed as number 3. I don't want number 2. Give me the one about the armed forces. Find the one about the armed forces. I bet they got the right one. And no mistakes in it either. Why do the armed forces deduct $25 from army paychecks for BC Medical? Is this a user fee? In other words, is this because BC applies user fees? This is not because BC has user fees. $25 is the way the Army shows on its paychecks the collection of the British Columbia health surtax introduced by our generous, ever-loving social credit government just about a year ago. Now we'll go to a free-for-all. Free-for-all? One call only? Does nobody know what the numbers are? What's the matter? Have I been lost and forgotten forever?
Hello?
Go ahead from Kamloops.
Yes, Mr. Webster. On your report from about Mr. Trudeau's family allowance,
Yeah.
we spoke to Nelson Reese's office in Ottawa. Mr. Trudeau is registered in Ontario, not Quebec. So therefore, he is probably collecting family allowance from Quebec when he's registered in Ottawa.
His residence is in the province of Quebec.
He is collecting family allowance in the province of Ontario. He is not registered in Quebec yet, sir.
Who said this?
Nelson Reese's office from Ottawa. He got a hold of the family allowance board, child family allowance board in Ottawa.
All right, my answer is still correct if he's collecting in Ontario, in Quebec.
But he's registered in Ottawa, not Quebec. So how can he collect family allowance while he's living in Ontario and not registered in Quebec?
My understanding is that he moved to his new townhouse in Montreal some 6 months ago.
Oh, okay then. Fine.
Should do more free-for-alls. You don't have to worry about guests. Make a fool of yourself on your own. It's not time up already. The board lights up, and here we're done. I promise to do a full morning of free-for-alls one of these days soon, and to cancel the selection of dull guests, which are probably on the board right now. No, I haven't time to talk to you, but thanks for them. Oh yeah, tell me something. Go ahead. No, don't go ahead. I'll be back after the break. Walter Fletcher of the WCB Compensation Board is going to be here in the morning, as is Graham Lee, the one-man party, and the return of Sawatsky. What's Sawatsky? John Sawatsky. Not a bad program. But we've got to do some mornings of free-for-alls. I need more demand from you to do free-for-alls. That's what I need. It's the longest 35 seconds I've gone through in years. This is not 35 seconds. Don't tell me, because I know 35 seconds. I have a built-in timer. I'll be back tomorrow at 9 a.m. precisely. Second shot. The expert who freed Norm Fox on Check at Midnight. The Truth About Gazenko, tomorrow, 9 a.m. precisely.